Hello board game brothers and sisters, I'm Adam Singer and welcome to another episode where I'll be letting you know of all the board games launching on Kickstarter and GameFound over the next week. If you're new to the channel, we do this every week going over all the upcoming campaigns, so if you want to stay up to date, this is definitely the place to be. But before we get started, I do like to go over some news and announcements that I just found out about. But it's been a pretty slow month on that regard. I don't really have any big news to announce, so I think we can just skip over that this week as well. But before we jump into the campaigns, I do always like to mention to check out Board Game Co. if you haven't already. Him and I do work together putting together these lists of games, and we just sync up periodically to make sure that all our info is as up to date as possible. I do these every week, but he does a video at the start of each month going over the entire month and letting you know of all the heavy hitters that you would probably want to know about. He also offers a ton of other content and goes into a lot of these campaigns in detail over multiple videos, so if you want even more information, definitely check him out. You can find a link to his channel in the description below. But that's everything I have for an intro, and we got quite a few interesting games launching this week, so let's check them out. And the first campaign we have launches on June 20th, and this one's called Paragons Age of Champions. This plays 2 to 3 players, it takes about 45 to 75 minutes to play, and this one is a head-to-head card battler that I did cover last week because I thought it was going to launch last week, but I got pushed off until now. So I do already have footage for this one, and I'll just go ahead and roll that for you now. This one is a competitive card battler that uses drafting as well as deck building, and it also incorporates a lot of elements of your classic trading card game, but rather than having to buy a bunch of different decks of cards, everything is supplied in a single box. And like I said, depending on what you choose, it's going to change your overall style of play for the game, but after you've chosen your leader card, players are going to be taking turns drafting mercenary cards from the supply at the center of the table. These mercenaries are your primary means of combat, and they are all unique and have their own advantages, so you're going to be trying to pick mercenaries that synergize well with your leader card. If your chosen class was the warrior, that's going to allow you to apply all sorts of different buffs to your mercenaries, but if you chose the mage, that's going to grant you different spells that you can use against your opponents and also to manipulate the board. Finally, there is the ranger, which is going to allow you to gain access to all sorts of different traps and tools to try and put your opponents in a vulnerable state in order to work up to a more calculated attack. I couldn't find too much more info on how combat actually works in this game, but I imagine it'll work very similar to a lot of other card battlers with these unique elements layered on top of it. So if this one does sound interesting to you, you can definitely check it out to learn more and learn more about how exactly it plays. And I have links to the campaign in the description below. And also launching on the 20th, we have Nestlings, and this plays 1 to 4 players. It takes about 30 to 60 minutes to play, and this one is a competitive dice rolling and bidding game where each player is going to be playing as their own individual bird with their own clutch of baby nestlings. And this is a game that plays over 4 rounds, and at the start of each round, every player is going to be simultaneously rolling their pool of dice. Players do get 1 free re-roll if they want to re-roll any of their dice to get some different values, but essentially what players are trying to do is to get values that match different regions of the board, because after all the players have rolled their dice, they're going to be taking turns assigning 1 die at a time to one of the 5 regions of the board. Each region has its own icon that correlates to one of the sides of each of your dice, and you can only assign dice to a region that have a matching icon. As players are placing their dice, they can also spend some of their resources to re-roll any of the remaining die or to set one of their die to a specific value. And the whole reason that players are trying to do this is because there's going to be different resources of different types at each of these regions. And after all the dice have been placed, each region is going to be resolved with the player who has the most dice there getting first choice of whichever tokens that they want from that region. And any other players that also place their dice there will also be able to take a stack of their choice in order from most to least dice. If players place the same amount of dice in a location, then the order that you place them is going to take priority instead. But there is a difference for the player that is getting first choice of all these tokens, because they're also going to have the opportunity to discard any of the other stacks as well, preventing all the other players from being able to choose them for themselves. There is also a difference with the center location on the board, because this one doesn't actually get any resources of its own. Instead, this one is also the last region to be resolved, and whoever has dice there is going to be able to choose from any of the remaining resources at any of the other locations. And of course, the reason that players are trying to get all these different resources is because this is a set collection game, and you're going to be getting victory points for accomplishing different sets. If you're able to get all the different types from a region, that's going to be getting you victory points. If you can get every single region completed, then that's going to get you another set of victory points. Then there are also shared objectives as well as secret objectives that players are trying to achieve. And on top of all of this, each player is going to have a specific resource that they're going to be using to feed their birds. And if you don't have enough of that resource at the end of each round, then you're going to be losing some victory points. The player with the most victory points at the end of the game wins the game, and if you want to check this one out, I have links in the description below. And also launching on the 20th, we have the Gloomhaven 2nd edition, the Frosthaven 2nd printing, as well as miniatures for any Gloomhaven content that you want miniatures for, as well as a brand new Gloomhaven RPG. And I'm just going to come out and say that this one is my own personal pick of the week. Just to be clear, I am not a huge fanboy of the game Gloomhaven. I haven't really played it. I'm not really interested in playing it, but I think what they're offering here is really impressive, and I think the RPG actually looks really, really exciting. And this might even be a bit of a controversial opinion, but the 2nd edition also plays a big part in why this one is my own personal pick of the week, and I'll go into explaining that all in a second here. But if you're not familiar with Gloomhaven, this is a cooperative adventure where players are each going to have their own character as well as their own deck of cards. Players are going to be working together, completing different scenarios as they explore the worlds of Gloomhaven, trying to complete their own specific goals, but then also trying to defeat the evil that is growing within the world. Whenever players jump into a dungeon, they're going to be setting up the board according to that specific scenario, and then the game's going to be played over a series of rounds. At the start of each round, each player is going to be choosing 2 cards from their available deck in order to play on that round. One's going to be acting as your main action, and one will be acting as your secondary action. And what I mean by that is that each of these cards are actually dual use, with a more powerful primary action and a less powerful secondary action. But from the 2 cards that you chose, you're going to be choosing one primary action from one of those cards, and then the secondary action from the other. But that's not all, because the cards that you pick are also going to dictate which order you get to perform your action relative to the other players, as well as the enemies, because the enemies are going to have an initiative value, but then the cards that you pick also have an initiative value on them as well. And then when all the players reveal their cards, the order of activation is going to be dictated by those initiative values. And the different actions available to you will allow you to do all sorts of different types of movement, attacks, or special abilities. Some of these actions can also have some different elemental effects, allowing players to either build up or spend some elemental tokens in order to perform that action. Any cards that you play will be discarded at the end of your turn, which means that you can get them back later by performing a rest action, but some of the cards might have a special icon on them indicating that instead of discarding them, you're actually going to be burning them for the rest of the scenario. Anytime that a player performs an attack action, it's normally going to allow them to draw from the attack modifier deck. This can have all sorts of effects, but it's normally going to be adding or removing damage from your attack. Defeated enemies do drop loot, which you can pick up by going onto that specific hex, or also by using a loot card, which will allow you to pick up any loot within a certain distance. Of course, like I said, each character activates in their initiative order, which means that you might be getting attacked by enemies before you have a chance to defeat them. And a player is defeated if they ever run out of health, but the nice thing here is that you can discard some of your cards in order to avoid damage, but you'll also be defeated if you ever run out of cards. And the game continues like this over a ton of different scenarios as players explore the world and discover many of its secrets. And this does have some legacy elements like tuck boxes or putting stickers onto the main map as you discover different towns and points of interest, but it's nothing that will prevent you from playing the game for a second time if you have the time for it. If you already own the 1st edition of Gloomhaven, I don't think you need to rush out and buy the 2nd edition. All the changes here are pretty minor, but I did say at the start of the video that one of the reasons that this is my pick of the week is because of the work they did on the 2nd edition. But I don't think the changes here are going to make it a way better or a way different game. It's just that when you're making even minor tweaks to such a massive game, there is an attention to detail and overhead that requires quite a lot of work, and I just think they did a really great job of it. The main things here are just typo fixes, clarifications to avoid different loopholes or dead-end scenarios, and they did also make some changes to the physical components in terms of their presentation, or they're just minor changes to the strength of the component because they did swap out the stands for slightly better ones, and they are offering a slightly more reinforced box because this is quite a large game, and storing all of that in a box can be quite a strain. The most significant changes that they made that might affect the gameplay are also still pretty minor. They made some small tweaks to some of the characters just to balance out their relative power. And then basically they just did a similar thing to some of the enemies and bosses just to make them feel a little bit less unfair or annoying for some of the bosses that felt that way. If you're interested in Frosthaven, there is going to be a second printing here, so you will be able to get your hands on it, but this is exactly the same as the previous release of Frosthaven. There's no changes here, and this is the same edition. But of course, the thing that everyone's been asking for is the miniatures. The original game just offered miniatures for your main characters, but everything else was offered with standees. They're going to be offering a lineup of miniatures for everything previously released, so whether you own Gloomhaven, Frosthaven, Forgotten Circles, or Jaws of the Lion, there's going to be miniatures to replace all the standees as well as the tokens for enemies, bosses, and summoned creatures. And in case you're wondering, this is over 500 miniatures in total. And then finally, we have the RPG, and like I said, this is another reason this is my own personal pick of the week. And the reason for that is that a big part of why Gloomhaven is such a success is because of the quality of the campaign that it offers. But it does come with a lot of overhead and fiddliness because this is not an easy game to get to the table. Offering an RPG is a great alternative to experience the worlds of Gloomhaven without having to have a whole lot of setup or teardown. And you can just jump into the game with a lot more freedom and start experiencing the story that the game has to offer. But that's not the only thing that I think makes this RPG so cool, because there is something about it that I think is going to make it stand out from a lot of other RPGs. And that's that in this one, you're actually still going to be maintaining that card management. I don't know exactly how it's going to work, but they do mention that this is cross-compatible with every previously released game. So I think those action cards might come into play when it comes to performing your actions in the actual RPG. I can imagine that this could work out really well because traditionally in RPGs, you are limited to the amount of spells and abilities that you can perform, and using these cards in a similar way that they are used in the actual board game is a great way to incorporate that. Other than that, you can also use the components and miniatures to augment your RPG experience, but this is going to be playing quite a bit differently than the board game, even if you do share some of the components. Using those components is completely optional, and another big change here is that in the board game, your class and your race were tightly coupled together, but in the RPG, you'll actually be able to mix and match whatever you want, so you can actually have any set of skills with any of the benefits that come with a specific race. I love RPGs, but I just rarely find the time to be consistent with them, so I'm definitely more of a board gamer. But when it comes to the case of Gloomhaven, I think the RPG might actually be a lower overhead than the board game. So if the fiddliness and the expansiveness of the board game was intimidating, the RPG might be a better choice, and I think it's what I would go for in this scenario. Of course, there is also the digital app as well, but it's just not going to be at the same level socially as either the board game or the RPG. So it's nice that we have all these different options, but in the end, it's up to you to weigh the pros and cons depending on what you're interested in, and if you're interested in any of these. If so, you can check out the campaign. I got links in the description below. And also launching on the 20th, we have an expansion for the game Mixtape Massacre, and this plays 2 to 6 players and takes about 45 to 120 minutes to play. And if you're not familiar with this game, this is a competitive game where each player is going to be playing as a different horror character, and everyone's going to be starting on the streets around the perimeter of the map, but players are going to be rolling to move in order to move around that map and collect their souvenirs. On a player's turn, they're going to be rolling a die to determine their movement points, and then depending on the spaces that you stop on, you'll be able to perform various actions. If you land on a bonus card location, you'll be able to draw a card from the bonus deck, which can have positive or negative effects. Of course, players can land on the souvenir spaces, where players will be able to roll their weapon die in order to hopefully gain that souvenir. Whenever you're rolling these dice, there's a bunch of different weapons that can come into play, but if you get triples of any of them, you're going to get some bonus special effects. And then finally, there are the scene locations, and anytime that you land on one of these spaces, you're going to be drawing a scene card, which is going to have some sort of skill test that you're going to have to roll dice in order to try and complete. And if you are able to complete it, you gain 1 souvenir, and then you go on a killing spree. What that means is that you get to roll that movement die again, but any value that you roll is doubled. This can allow you to move through many spaces that have civilians on them that you might be able to collect as souvenirs. Of course, each player does have a health track as well, and there's a bunch of different ways that you can get damaged in this game. But of course, one of those is anytime that 2 players end up adjacent to each other, that's going to trigger a battle where each player is going to be rolling dice, trying to get the most successes in order to inflict damage on the other. Anytime you die, you're going to be moving back to the reanimation station, which essentially keeps you in the game, but sets you back just a little bit. But this new expansion is actually going to be playing quite a bit differently than the original game, because rather than playing as the slashers, players are actually going to be playing as the civilians. This means that the players might be working together at times to rescue other civilians, fight back against the enemies, and safeguard the town. But this is still a competitive game, because in the end, there's only going to be one survivor, and if that survivor is you, then you win the game. And if you want to learn more, you can check out this campaign. I have links in the description below. Also on the 20th, we have Eldfall Chronicles Northern Wind, and this plays 1 to 4 players. It takes about 45 to 120 minutes to play, and this one is a standalone expansion to the original game, Eldfall Chronicles. You'll be able to play these independently or mix them together, and these games are cooperative dungeon crawlers that incorporate many skirmish elements. This does also offer a player versus player mode as well if you'd rather fight against your friends rather than working with them, but I did already cover the original campaign back when it launched, so if you want to know how these games play, I'll just go ahead and roll that previous footage for you now, and if you want to know more, you can check out the campaign. I have it linked in the description below. And this is an RPG-inspired fantasy skirmish game, which can be played cooperatively, competitively, or solo against the AI. You're going to have multiple threats in this game because players will be facing off against both present conflicts and ancient terrors. Players are going to be leading their troops against each other while also fighting against some terrible beasts. Like I said, this game can be played cooperatively as well, so instead of fighting against each other, you can also team up and face different battles together. Just like in a classic role-playing game, players are going to be rolling a d20 and then adding that number to their existing stats to determine the outcome of their moves. Players also have a number of actions that they can perform on their turn, but you're going to want to be strategic with how many of these actions you actually use, because if you don't have any left, you're not going to have any actions available to react against incoming attacks. This game features some really nice artwork and miniatures, and each character is going to behave a little bit differently because they all have their very own skill sets, tool sets, as well as strengths and weaknesses for the players to explore. And also launching on the 20th, we have another expansion, but this one is going to be for the game Dog Parks, and it's called the New Tricks expansion. This is going to be increasing the player count from 1 to 4 to 1 to 5 players, and it also takes about 50 to 90 minutes to play. But this new expansion is going to be adding a few different things. There's going to be more dogs to walk, more places to explore, and a new trainer that's going to help you expand your engine, essentially by teaching your dogs some new tricks and earning them some new skills that you'll be able to take advantage of. But I did cover this original campaign back when the original game launched, so if you want to know how the game plays, I'll just go ahead and roll that previous footage for you now. And this is a set collection and point-to-point movement game, all about taking care of different dogs in their kennels, but then also taking as many of those dogs for walks to score victory points. Players take on the role of these dog walkers, and it's going to be up to you to recruit, walk, and take care of the dogs. The game plays over 4 rounds, and each round is split into 4 phases. There's the recruitment phase where players are going to be bidding on dogs using victory points in order to bid. Then there's the selection phase where players decide which of the dogs that they've recruited that they plan to walk for the next round. The walking phase is where the majority of points are earned because players are going to be choosing which dogs to take with them on the walk, and then journeying through the board, trying to gain different victory points and collect different resources depending on the dogs that they chose to walk and what opportunities are presented to them on the board. So essentially, it's the combination of dogs that you choose to walk and then the route that you decide to take that's going to determine what sort of resources and victory points you end up with. And then finally, there's the home time phase where players earn points for their walked dogs and lose points for any unwalked dogs that were left in their kennels. And negative points is normally a board game designer's faux pas, pun included. But I really like it in this case because dogs are really high energy, and if you have a dog, you need to be walking it. Dogs are not meant to be left in a kennel or a home, and the negative points really tie into that from an ethical standpoint, so it's a really good example of how theme can really justify something that's normally looked down upon and turn it into something that's fun. Also, some really nice artwork here, and I really love these dog walking meeples, and it looks like this game might have taken some inspiration from Wingspan because it looks like some of these cards have a little bit of info about the different breeds of the dogs. Looks like a fun little game, so for all you dog lovers out there, or if you know someone who would really appreciate a game like this, feel free to click to get notified. I have links to all these campaigns in the description below. Also on the 20th, we have Titan Defense Organization. This plays 1 to 5 players. It takes about 45 to 60 minutes to play. And this one is a cooperative dice rolling game where players are going to be fighting against all sorts of different titans. Each of the titans are going to have 4 different health tracks that you're trying to deplete down to 0, and they're also going to have an action deck and different effects and tokens that they leave behind as they move around on the main board. And the players are going to have a whole bunch of different heroes that they can play as, each with their own passive abilities, ultimate abilities, as well as additional abilities that you can purchase throughout the game. And something that I do really like about this game is that it is turn-based, but every single player is involved in that turn because the active player is going to get to roll all 3 of their dice, but then every other player is just going to be able to roll 1. Players are going to be assigning these dice to their own individual sheets in order to determine the actions that they're going to be performing for that turn. And this allows the players to do all sorts of different things like attack, move, heal, or defend themselves, or gain additional energy, which essentially acts like a resource in the game. Of course, the magnitude of each of these actions is going to be dictated by the value of the die that you rolled, because for each of these 4 different types of actions, you're going to have to decide which die is going to go where, with the higher die values giving you a more powerful version of that action. And of course, players are going to be using these actions to move around on that main board and attack the Titan. But like I said, the Titan has 4 different health tracks that you're trying to get down to 0. And the way that you determine which health track you are attacking is dependent on which colored space that your character is currently standing on. This means that players will be trying to manipulate the enemy's movement, but then also trying to time their attacks accordingly. And after all the players have performed their actions, you're going to be drawing a Titan card, which is just going to be giving you some instructions to the way that the enemy is going to be behaving. This usually means that they're going to be moving around and inflicting damage on the different heroes, and you lose the game anytime that 3 heroes are killed. But the nice thing here is that anytime that one of your heroes dies, you just choose a new hero from the box, and then you'll continue playing as that hero. But as soon as 3 different heroes are killed, you lose the game. Or the other way that you can lose the game is anytime 3 bases are destroyed by the Titan. And the way that this works is that anytime the Titan moves into a space with a base, it's just instantly destroyed. So you're going to want to try and avoid getting into that scenario. If the players can defeat the Titan before either of those 2 things happen, then they win the game. And if you want to know more, you can check out the campaign. I have it linked in the description below. And now for games launching on the 21st, we have Nuovarden, but this one is an RPG, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. But the thing that makes this one a little bit different than a lot of other RPGs is that this one is inspired by games like Castlevania or Outward, or even Avatar the Airbender, because in this game there are 8 disciplines of power that you're going to be developing throughout the game. And it's also inspired by games like Monster Hunter, because in this RPG you can also kill monsters, harvest their parts in order to craft new weapons and gear that you'll be able to use throughout the campaign. Another thing about this RPG is that it doesn't have your traditional classes that you see in a lot of other RPGs. Instead, you'll just be able to create any combination of skills and stats that you're interested in, and then you'll be able to develop it as you go. And if you do want to know more about this one, I do have it linked in the description below where you can check it out and click to get notified. Also on the 21st, we have another expansion, but this one is for Scarface 1920, and this is the Bloody Business expansion. This plays 1 to 4 players. It takes about 90 to 180 minutes to play. And one thing to note about this one is that it is not going to retail, so if you are interested in this game, you definitely want to be checking out the campaign. But this expansion is essentially going to be adding more to the base game, but especially changing the way the game flows and the strategies and actions that will be available. I'd say the big difference with this one is that it's going to be creating more of a narrative as you play the game, making each of the games you play tell a bit of a different story. But if you are interested to know how the original game plays, I did cover this one back when it launched a couple of years ago, so I'll just go ahead and roll that previous footage for you now. And this takes place during the Prohibition, during the Roaring Twenties, and players will be leading their own gang of mobsters, running their own bootlegging operations, brokering deals, and upgrading their HQ, and bribing the authorities to turn a blind eye to their operations. Each mob boss has their own distinct set of abilities that are going to be reflected throughout the game, and players will be using area majority, card drafting, hand management, and different worker types to gain their advantage throughout the game. The game will also feature some familiar faces, miniatures, plastic resource tokens, and the player that rules Chicago by the end of the game wins. And on the 23rd, we have Waypoints, and this plays as many players as you could ever want and takes about 20 to 40 minutes to play. And whenever you see a player count like that, it usually indicates that it's a roll and write, and this one is no exception. This is a roll and write where players are going to be hiking through various landscapes and weather in order to see different sights and earn victory points. The way this game works is that each round you're going to be rolling a weather die, which is going to dictate the weather for that round. It's also going to dictate how much time is left in the day. The game plays over 4 rounds, with each round representing a day, and all the players are going to be simultaneously marking a route on their player sheet and moving from waypoint to waypoint, trying to score points for animals and features that they encounter along the way. Unfortunately, I don't have a whole lot of info on how this one plays, so if you do want to know more, you should definitely check out the campaign. But whoever has the most points at the end of the game wins the game, and you can find links to the campaign in the description below. And those are all the campaigns I have for you this week, but don't leave yet because we still have a couple awesome giveaways to announce. And the first one is for a pledge for the game Burning Banners. And if you are a fan of war games or a fan of fantasy themed games, or a fan of both, you'll definitely want to check this one out because this one is a scenario-based war game offering you a whole ton of different scenarios that all have different objectives as well as different player counts, but it also offers a campaign that you can play through an entire war. But in this game, you're going to be trying to complete all sorts of different objectives depending on the scenario you're playing, which means you could be trying to defeat different monsters, collect different loot and gold, or even try to control different cities. Players are going to be recruiting all sorts of different fantasy heroes, which they're going to be paying resources in order to deploy them out on the map. The different heroes can have all sorts of stats and range of attacks, and players will be able to play across 4 different hand-drawn maps that I think look absolutely amazing. So fantastic work. This is a lot prettier than your typical war game. But just like in your typical war game, you will be going head-to-head against another player or another team of players because this is always one side versus the other. And if you have 2 players, one player is going to be playing as the orcs and the enemies, while the other player is playing as the heroes. But if you have more than 2 players, then you're going to be splitting yourself amongst the 2 sides, playing as a team against each other. And this giveaway is going to be for the Rage of the Witch Queen pack pledge, which comes with the core game and all unlocked stretch goals. And under this giveaway, like I said, all you have to do is leave a comment down below. Any comment will do because this is the only giveaway I'm going to be doing in the comment section this week because our next giveaway is going to be run over on the Discord. And this one is going to be for a pledge for the Quest Chest Immersive Tabletop Role-Playing Adventures, which essentially gives you a bunch of modules that you can mix into any role-playing game that you want. And it supports almost every single role-playing system you can think of. Each of these are also going to come with some really cool components that you can integrate into your game in different ways. Some of them giving you different items that you might be able to use throughout the campaign, while others might be giving you more of an immersive effect, like scented candles or even different types of coffees and teas. And this giveaway is going to allow you to pick any one of these quests from the many offered on the campaign because this giveaway is going to be for the single adventure pledge. This is going to allow you to pick one of those adventure boxes and all the associated components. To enter this giveaway, all you have to do is check out the link to our Discord in the description below, head over to the giveaways channel and click the emoji underneath that giveaway. That'll get you entered into that giveaway, which will be automatically drawn at the end of the week. Last week's giveaway was also offered on the Discord, and there is still a few hours left if you're watching this video early enough. So if you check out the Discord quick enough, you can also enter into that giveaway as well. But it's going to be drawn really soon. So if you did enter the giveaway, just make sure to keep an eye on your Discord because I will message the winner as soon as that gets drawn. And that's everything I have this week. I hope there is something in there that caught your interest, but either way, I do appreciate you stopping by and checking out the video. So as always, just remember to keep that shelf cluttered and the table full.